Thank you for joining us for this somber remembrance of the anniversary of the Atlanta, Georgia spa shootings. I'm Congressmember Judy Chu, chair of the Congressional Asian Pacific American Caucus. I will never forget the moment that 1 year ago today, a gunman entered 3 Asian-owned spas and killed 8 people, including 6 Asian women. He was so deliberate in his desire to kill Asian women that he drove 27 miles between the spas to ensure he would hit his targets. Because of this, America was finally shocked awake to the reality of anti-Asian hate. But in reality, for over a year, xenophobic slurs like China virus and Kung flu have been terrorizing Asian American communities across the country with thousands of anti-Asian hate crimes and incidents. Immediately after this shooting, I led a delegation to Atlanta, where we retraced the shooter steps and met with the victims' families. I will never forget seeing the tears streaming down their faces, thunderstruck by the loss of their loved ones. Thankfully, the country rallied together to stop Asian hate with events, rallies, and over 1 billion interactions on our National Day of Action alone. Today, we will be sharing the stories and remembering the victims of the over 11,000 impacted by anti-Asian violence. And next, I would like to bring up someone who has stood by our side every step of the way, Speaker Nancy Pelosi.
Thank you, Judy Chu, for your tremendous leadership on this important subject, really on the subject of respect for everyone in our country. You have helped us understand, recognize, document crimes against the Asian community that have just been hard to understand, and more recently, in some people's view, been normalized. As we join together today, let us salute again Madam Chair Judy Chu, Chair of the Congressional Asian Pacific Caucus, for organizing us, not just today, but on the ongoing. It's my privilege to stand alongside Representative Grace Meng, KPAC's first Vice Chair, whose COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act we enacted last year, Senator Mazie Hirono, who introduced and championing that bill in the Senate. Thank you, Madam Senator. Chairman Mark Takano, KPAC's second Vice Chair, Representative Ted Lieu, KPAC's whip, Rep. Marilyn Strickland, one of the first Korean American women ever elected to the House, Chairman Hakeem Jeffries, a diligent leader of our House Democratic Caucus, and Representative Nikina Williams, who proudly represents Atlanta. I mention these names, especially, and my colleagues will concur, I'm sure, those in our community, in our caucus, from the Asian Pacific American community, to demonstrate the extent of their leadership in the Congress, and they are representative of so many other more. Today, Congress remembers the 8 Americans who were murdered in an act of bigotry 1 year ago, 6 of whom were Asian American women. As we pray for too many AAPI lives claimed by hate, let us especially recognize them, as Chairwoman Chu has done. We've been asked to pay tribute to a constituent. I will pay constituent Devisha Rakatomalkapakti. Last year, the beloved father, grandfather, and proud Thai immigrant known as Grandpa Visha was murdered in a racist attack on his daily morning walk. This act of violence horrified the people of San Francisco, who take pride in our large and vibrant Asian AAPI community. Let us honor Grandpa Visha's memory today and every day by carrying on the fight to stop Asian hate. AAPI Americans, the sun is getting to me. AAPI Americans have long been subjected to the evil of bigoted violence, a crisis that has surged during the pandemic. As Chairwoman Chu said more than 11,000 acts of AAPI, anti-AAPI hate have been reported since March 2020, just 2 years ago, and nearly three-quarters of AAPI women have experienced discrimination or racism in the last 12 months. This is why, with the COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act, Congress took historic action to help stamp out hate and hold offenders accountable, delivering new resources to expedite the review of hate crimes and empower the individuals to come forward. As we remember those stolen from us by hate, the Congress will continue fighting to combat racist violence in all of its forms. It's now my privilege to yield to KPAC's first vice chair and the author of the COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act, Representative Grace Meng. Pleased to yield to Grace Meng. Grace.
Thank you, Speaker Pelosi. In the aftermath of our country remembering the horrors of the Atlanta shooting, our country linked arms to mourn their losses, those within the AAPI community and those beyond as well. We cried together then, but since then our tears have only continued to flow. In Atlanta, we learned about the lives of the women who died, the moms, wives, and we remembered that their stories were beautiful and just as American as anyone else's. Just in my hometown of New York City in the past few weeks, I brought as my guest to the State of the Union Maggie Chang, who was the daughter of my constituent who was shoved to the ground and called racial slurs. In recent weeks, I've met with and kept in touch with the family of Michelle Go and learned about what a beautiful, selfless life she led. Just yesterday, I notified the son and the husband of our Queens neighbor, Gui Ying Ma, that he was approved to come to New York to see his mom one last time. We owe it to the 8 Americans from Atlanta that we lost to continue to work together to combat bigotry, racism, misogyny, and violence. And we will not rest until we can all exist safely in this country, until we are all truly seen as Americans. Next, I'd like to invite up our fearless leader in the U.S. Senate, Senator Mazie Hirono.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman Meng. Grace, we worked very hard together to pass the COVID-19 hate crimes bill. 1 year ago, the country, and in particular the AAPI community, was shaken by a horrific act of violence. But as we all know, this was not a one-off incident. Just last month, Christina Yuna Lee, a 35-year-old woman from Manhattan, was stabbed to death by a stranger in her own apartment. May her memory and the memory of all of the victims of this kind of senseless violence continue to guide us, continue to affirm our resolve. From 2020 to 2021, anti-Asian hate crimes increased by 339%. And in fact, the Department of Justice testified before the Judiciary Committee only last week that these kinds of crimes targeting Asian Americans, the AAPI community, continues. Everyone in this country, as Grace mentioned, deserves to feel safe and welcome in our communities. We made important progress toward that goal with the passage of the COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act, but our work is obviously not done. That's why we all will continue to advocate on behalf of our communities until every person in our country feels free from fear, from discrimination, and violence. Mahalo. I'd like to introduce next Congressman Jeffries, who is a leader on so many issues in the House.
Thank you, Senator Hirono. Today we stand together in solidarity with the Asian American community all across the country to commemorate the one-year anniversary of the horrific spa shootings and the tragic massacre that occurred in the Atlanta area. Stand together in solidarity with the Asian American community to make it clear that good will prevail over evil and that love will prevail over hate. Today, I have the honor and the solemn responsibility of lifting up the story of Yao Pan Ma. In April of 2021, Mr. Ma was pushing a grocery cart full of bottles and cans through his beloved East Harlem community when he was attacked from behind and violently forced to the ground. His attacker stomped on his head and kicked him repeatedly before fleeing, leaving Yao Pan Ma on a ventilator and in a coma for months. After struggling and fighting for his life, he eventually succumbed to his wounds and tragically died on New Year's Eve. One of thousands of victims of Asian hate that has tragically been on the rise. An attack on Mr. Ma, an attack on any member of the Asian American community is an attack on all of us. And so we stand together in solidarity with our Asian American brothers and sisters. We will confront anti-Asian hate crimes. We will confront racism. We will confront bigotry. We will confront xenophobia. We will continue to stand with our Asian American brothers and sisters until we stop Asian hate. It's now my honor to yield to the distinguished chairman of the Veterans Committee and a leader on these issues, Chairman Mark Takano.
Thank you, Chairman Jeffries. Thank you, Speaker Pelosi, and thank you, Chairwoman Chu, for your tremendous leadership. My colleague Grace Meng and Senator Hirono for their legislative prowess in moving the anti-Asian hate crimes bill through the Congress. I want to lift up the story of Juanito Falcon, a 74-year-old man who was walking around his Phoenix, Arizona neighborhood when he was punched in the face in an unprovoked attack last February. The punch caused him to fall on his face in a parking lot, hitting his head on the pavement where police found him. 2 days later, he died from his head injuries. These kinds of attacks happen every day and devastate our community in unimaginable ways. 1 year ago today, an attack on 3 Asian-owned businesses in Atlanta, Georgia, killed 8 people, 6 of whom were Asian women. If we truly want to honor the 8 individuals whose lives were tragically taken 1 year ago and the thousands of other victims of anti-Asian hate, then we must, on top of the legislation that was passed on a bipartisan basis, we must continue to speak out against violence, racism, and xenophobia, and take more meaningful steps to turn our words into actions. And now I yield to my colleague from California, Ted Lieu.
Thank you, Congressman Takano, and thank you, Chairwoman Chu and Speaker Pelosi, for hosting this remembrance. The recently completed U.S. Census and the census before that shows that Asian Pacific Americans are the fastest increasing ethnic group in America. The Pew Research Organization has projected by 2055, Asian Americans will become the largest immigrant group in America. At the same time, we've seen a dramatic rise in hate crimes and hate incidents against Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. Today, we remember the victims of last year's tragic hate crimes in Georgia, and we honor all the victims of hate crimes, including those in my home state of California. I want to lift up today Pak Ho. He was an elderly Asian American who was simply walking in Oakland's Chinatown. He was attacked, his head hit the pavement, and then 2 days later, he passed away. I want to thank the members of Congress standing behind me in solidarity with Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, as well as Americans across this country. And we urge local, state, and federal prosecutors and law enforcement to continue the work that they are doing to stopping hate crimes and to prosecuting those who engage in such crimes. And now it's my honor to yield to Representative Marilyn Strickland from the state of Washington.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, for gathering us today to commemorate the tragic anniversary of the hate crime that took place in Atlanta. Today I stand in honor of Michelle Go, who was pushed from behind and killed on a New York City subway platform earlier this year. Racially motivated violence must be called out for exactly what it is, and we must stop making excuses for it or calling it economic anxiety, or in the case of the spa murders, sexual addiction. As a woman who is Black and Korean myself, I'm acutely aware of how it feels to be erased and ignored. How the default position when violence is committed against people of color, and especially women of color, we defer to confronting the hate that is often the motivation for this violence. Words matter. Leadership matters. We must stop normalizing racism in this country. We must all loudly condemn actions and language rooted in fear and bigotry. We are better than this. We must be. That's what the American experience is supposed to be about. I now yield to my colleague, Nikema Williams, fellow freshman from the state of Georgia.
Thank you, Speaker Pelosi and Chairwoman Chu, for marking this solemn anniversary. I'm Congresswoman Nikema Williams, and y'all, I proudly represent Georgia's 5th Congressional District in Atlanta, the city too busy to hate. 1 year ago, Atlanta and the country watched in horror as hate crimes were committed at 3 Asian spas in our area. The 8 victims, primarily Asian women, were only providing for their families. They were doting parents, hard-working employees, friends quick to share a smile, and beloved members of their communities. They didn't deserve what happened to them. Everyone, no matter their race, ethnicity, or gender, has the right to live without fear of violence in their workplace or public spaces. We must honor the legacies of these 8 victims and stop all forms of racism. Sadly, anti-Asian hatred has continued since the Atlanta spa shootings 1 year ago. But I will continue to stand with Chairwoman Chu, the Congressional Asian Pacific American Caucus, Speaker Pelosi, and my colleagues here in the House that have joined us today, and anyone else willing to do the right thing and eradicate hatred, especially anti-Asian hate. And now, I'll turn it back over to our Chairwoman, Judy Chu.
These stories are just a few of the over 11,000 anti-Asian hate crimes and incidents that have terrorized our communities since the start of this pandemic. And in fact, just this week, we saw another horrific example as an elderly woman, an Asian woman in Yonkers, New York, was attacked with racial slurs and then punched and kicked by an individual over 125 times. This was terrifying, and it reminds us of the fear so many in our communities are living with every single day. But while this violence continues, I'm also encouraged by how much has changed in these 12 months. First, I must thank all the members of Congress standing behind me, as well as the members of the Asian American Staff Association and community. And I must thank Speaker Pelosi for leading this press conference. And just last week, Congress passed a budget that includes $5 million to help implement the Jabara Hire No Hate Act, which Congress passed on a bipartisan vote last May. And in October, we in KPAC met with U.S. Attorney General Merrick Garland, who has begun already dispersing another $21 million to improve our response to hate crimes. And significantly, instead of a president who fans the flames of bigotry, President Biden has been a true ally in this fight, including acting in his first week in office to instruct the DOJ, the Department of Justice, to work with AAPI communities to find solutions. But as these stories show, these crimes are continuing, and we will not be safe until we end the xenophobic rhetoric that puts lives in danger. And that's why we rely on all Americans, all of you, of all ethnicities, to stand up and to stand together to stop Asian hate. Thank you all very much. Okay.